So I'm about to introduce you to an absolute powerhouse of a woman. She left her corporate job 10 years ago to become a serial entrepreneur and author. And since then, she has set up Market Orders, which is an online marketplace for gold jewelry trade. And she's also achieved being the finalist of the Asian Women's Achievements Award, as well as authoring 3 books. And as of April 2018, so this year, she hit headlines when she became the first best-selling author on blockchain. So she is, the title of her talk is How to Live Fearlessly. And like I said, she's a powerhouse, so I hope you guys enjoy her talk. Round of applause.
Hello, good morning. Is the mic working? You can hear me? Oh, that's great, fantastic. Had a mini breakdown there. I was almost ready, and then, anyway. Let's start. So hello, my name is Sukhi, and I'm really happy to be here today, and more importantly, you guys chose to spend some time with us today and with me today, so thank you so much. So I'm going to actually start off with a little story. Are there any dog lovers in the house? Great, because by the end of this story, you probably won't like dogs anymore. So I'm going to start off with a story, and it's called The Howling Dog. So Tom had just moved into his new home, and he'd been saving up for ages, and he got his dream home, and he finally moved in. And he was very happy, and then after a few days, he noticed that the neighbor's dog was just always howling. So he gave it a day or so. The dog kept on howling day and night, so it was very persistent. And so after about a week, Tom decided to actually go and see his neighbor. His neighbor, Mr. Tan, was sitting on the front porch, sipping his beer. And Tom said, have you noticed your dog is always howling? And Mr. Tan said, yeah. So Tom said, well, why is he howling all the time? And Mr. Tan, the dog owner, said, because the dog is sitting on a nail. So Tom said, why doesn't he just get off the nail? And Mr. Tan, the dog owner, said, because it doesn't hurt enough. So my story today is actually about how I had been sitting on a very painful nail for many, many years. And I'm also going to share my story about how things got so painful for me that I finally decided to get off the nail. My talk is also going to share my journey about how I started to embrace fearlessness and really sort of try living my purpose and just go with whatever life was giving to me. So who am I? So thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I did write it, didn't I? So thank you. So my name is Sukhi Jutla, and I'm the co-founder and COO of Market Orders, which is an online marketplace. But my story really started about 10 years ago. I spent 10 years in the banking world, and I really hated every day. It took me 10 years to actually leave, so 10 years to get off that nail. But there were just so many factors that I guess were just holding me back. Maybe it's because sometimes we get very used to the way things are in our life. But I just found I was coasting along. I didn't really enjoy my job. Didn't really enjoy the people I was hanging out with. I wasn't really happy with my environment. Just everything just seemed to be going on a downward spiral. And to make matters worse, I would just complain about things and not really take any action. And then one day, life came knocking, and this is a little heads up. When you don't do anything to change your life, I always believe that the universe and life steps in to sort of gently nudge you in that direction. So my sort of awakening or knock on the door was when my dad actually had a near-fatal heart attack. My father was very young. He was in his 50s, in great health. So his heart attack came as a huge shock to me and the rest of my family. It took 40 minutes to resuscitate him, and I resuscitated him alongside the paramedics who were at my house for over an hour. With the 40 minutes, he was without oxygen, so that actually led to a high degree of brain damage. By the time my father was transported to hospital, he had another 3 cardiac arrests. When he was taken into the operating theatre, he had another 2 cardiac arrests. He was in surgery for about 6 hours, and when the doctor came out, they would only tell us if he would survive for another 12 hours or so. So for the next 3 months, my family and I sort of had a bedside vigil for my dad. He spent 3 months in intensive care. And after 3 months, an incredible miracle happened. He woke up. So that actually started the next journey of what was the next 2 years and 8 months. For the next 2 years and 8 months, my family and I supported my dad to get better. The tables had completely turned. He was unable to feed himself, he was unable to talk. So the next 2 years, my entire focus of my life became to helping my dad get better. He suffered a stroke, so he was bedbound. He was in a wheelchair for the remainder of those 2 years. But he really tried. You know, my dad was a guy who just loved life, and just seeing him get better, even just small things like he was able to pick up his spoon or he was able to swallow his food, those are just amazing things. And you know, the first time he smiled, that was amazing as well. So those things just, you know, really kept us going. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt I had a sense of focus and a sense of purpose. And that was about doing everything I could to make my dad get better. He was like, you know, the star in my life. Towards the end, he had lots of ups and downs, but he was being fed through a tube that went through his stomach, and that tube got infected. So he had to go into a routine operation whereby the tube from one side of his stomach was taken out and inserted into the other side. So that surgery went well. It was a short procedure, and he was totally fine. But after a few days, he picked up an infection, and for the next 3 weeks, he slowly slipped into a state of unconsciousness. And because he was already so weak and so ill, the doctor said he probably wouldn't come out of this, but we still kept fighting. I remember on his last day, he was just really putting all of his effort into taking every single breath that he could. Towards the last hours, one of his lungs collapsed and he was put on an assisted breathing machine. And I remember just watching my dad just taking every ounce of energy just to take a single breath. And that just astonished me, because I could see that he was a human being who, on the brink of death, was still struggling and fighting to live, because that is our basic instinct. Our instinct is to survive, our instinct is to breathe and to grow and to thrive. He was doing he was struggling towards the end, and I remember one of the nurses coming up to me and just gently putting her hand on my shoulder, and she said to me, "Sometimes the greatest act of love is to allow others to go." And so that's when I whispered into my father's ear that it was okay for him to go if he wanted to. I told him not to worry about us, and I told him that I would take care of the rest of the family. And he passed away within 10 minutes of that conversation. 1 month before my father died, my uncle had also passed away. And 3 weeks after my dad passed away, my grandmother passed away. So in the space of 3 months, I think it's an understatement to say, my life had changed quite a lot. The 3 people I loved so much, who were the life and soul of my life, had just disappeared. And that sort of really forced me to reassess what I was doing with my life. I felt completely lost. With those 3 huge characters in my life gone, it also sort of set about a cascade of changes within the family, because my dad was the glue in the family, and once he was gone, that sort of led to a lot of separations within the family. That led me to leaving home. I had to move towns. And so I just felt very alone and very isolated, and I fell into a period of deep depression. There were times where I did consider whether I wanted to go on or I wanted to continue living. And I think it was the 3rd time when I had come out of the tube station after another really crappy day at work. And I was just coming out of the train station, and the train station is on top of the bridge. And I was waiting for the traffic to slow down so I could cross the road. And I remember just looking at the bridge and just thinking and almost calculating at which sort of position would be the best spot for me to jump from, and the best position whereby I would cause the least amount of inconvenience for the other commuters. So it was at this point where I thought, this is really ridiculous. I cannot keep planning this. I should either do it or I should just make changes and start changing my life. And that was a critical moment for me, because I decided that I wanted to breathe. I decided I wanted to live. And more importantly, I decided I wanted to live for my dad. Because I believe that the greatest act of love that you can show anyone is not to be willing to die for them, but to be willing to live for them. So at that moment, that's the point where my journey into sort of discovering my purpose, discovering my passion started. I had a burning desire to start my own business. I really wanted to quit the job that I just absolutely hated, but it just didn't do it. I was surrounded by people who, didn't really contribute in a positive fashion in my life. So I decided I'm going to make those changes. So I quit my job. I was making 6 figures, and I quit that to make 0 figures. I also decided to change my lifestyle. So I decided to get fit and get better, because with the depression, I was not taking care of myself. I had put on a lot of weight. I had also, my hair was also falling out. Strangely, my eyebrows were also falling out. And sometimes I hesitate to say that, because at this moment, I think everyone will be focusing on my eyebrows now. They are real, and they have grown back. And that is part of the happy story, which I'll come back to. So I decided to get better. So I started to go to the gym every day. I quit the job I hated. I started to take baby steps towards building the business that I wanted to create. I downsized my life. I sold my car. I started to take better care of my finances. I sold all the fancy handbags and shoes that I had bought whilst I was working in the city. So I started to make all these big sacrifices. And what I noticed is, when you start making these changes internally, there's only a matter of time till those changes start manifesting externally. So when I stopped working in the city, I also stopped, talking to those city types. I was no longer invited to those fancy lunches, and that's okay, because I was, saving. I was having packed lunches. So I just, the whole sort of outlook of my life just started to change, and I started to embrace meditation. I made an effort to go to workshops where I could, learn about positivity. I also attended Mo coaching, which was really life-changing for me, and I also attended the Dream Factory, which was the beginnings of how I started my business venture. So I just started to make sure that I was in a very positive environment, and I just started to make these sorts of changes. And so some of the key takeaways I'd like to share with you today is really just 3 main things. The first one is self-love. I believe that it's only when you take stock of who you are and you embrace all of who you are, that's when your life can start fundamentally shifting. I left a very successful corporate career where I was earning 6 figures to just jumping into an entrepreneurial path where I had no experience, I had no support, and I had no money. But I believed in myself, and I loved myself enough to give myself this shot of chasing my dreams. And I knew that if I was chasing my dreams and following my legacy, then in that way I would be that would be creating a part of my father's legacy. Because what really got me about my father's passing is that he was young. He was in his 50s. He embraced life and he wanted to live. And so whenever I feel down and whenever I feel like, I can't find a way forward, I always just come back to the basics. I take a deep breath and I say, I'm alive. And I can actually make a difference, and I can actually change the course of my life, and I can actually be a positive change on someone else's life. The second thing I'd like to share with you is to embrace your strengths, and I call this your unfair advantage. sometimes, when we're in school, we're taught just to be like everybody else. And if you're just a little bit different, sometimes you're just picked on, or, sometimes people don't feel comfortable with that. But what I learned in my journey is I was really great at doing some things. I was really good at organizing things. I was really great at project managing things. And I was really, really good at sort of coming up with ideas. And these things had sort of been beaten out of me when I was in school. And so I was always hesitant about, embracing those challenges. And I never considered myself to be a business person or an entrepreneur. I came from a background and a family where everyone had these good, steady jobs. And now I was sort of branching out into this new sort of world. And you're not going to get it right all the time. In fact, this business is my 5th startup. So you could either say the last 4 businesses were failures, but I like to think of them as 4 feedbacks that have gently nudged me into this direction. The last concept I'd like to share with you is the Japanese concept of Wabi-Sabi. So Wabi-Sabi is about a concept about embracing your imperfections. And in Japan, they actually have this wonderful technique whereby if you break a vase, you take it in to get repaired, and the repairman will actually put gold paint on that particular fracture. And when you get the broken vase back, which is now fixed with that gold paint, you would display it in your home with the fracture facing your guests. Because now what you're saying is, this was the vase before, and now it's like this, but it's still beautiful. And so I would encourage all of you to put gold paint on all of those fractures that you see, because they're a part of you, and they are a part of you that make you who you are. So 4 years on, I'd like to, every story has a happy journey, happy ending, right? So I think I owe you a happy ending, especially with that dog story at the beginning. So 4 years on, where am I? I could say I could never have imagined where I could have been if I didn't embrace those fears and just going for what I really wanted. So 4 years on, I've set up my business called Market Orders. My business has been running for 2 years. It's gone through 3 different accelerator programs, which basically means I've received a ton of mentoring and advice from many different people to get my business to where it is. My business, out of 400 startups across London, was actually picked by the Mayor of London to star in an international campaign to showcase London as one of the best businesses, best places to actually start your business. And that was, there were 400 different companies and only 6 were chosen. So that was a great thing to have. Earlier this year, I was also featured in the Sunday Times and the Sunday Telegraph. I was featured as one of the 35 women under 35 to watch out for. So that was really great. I was also a finalist in the Asian Women of Achievement Awards. And this year, I was also listed as a top 100 Asian in UK tech. And just last week, I was also shortlisted for the Venus Awards, which is I've been told it's the Working Women's Oscars. I've been nominated for 2 awards there. One is called the Influential Woman, and the second award is Inspirational Woman in Tech. So what I really just want to share with you is, you just don't know what you're capable of unless you actually give it a go. Every step of this journey has been completely terrifying, from going from a very successful corporate career to sort of fumbling around in this new startup world and not really knowing what I'm doing. But every step has just helped me to become the person that I've always already been. This year, I also had over 112 meetings with investors to raise funding for my business. I raised £250,000 and I walked away from it. And I walked away from that money because those deal terms were not good for me and they were not good for my business. And so walking away from success, or what other people would usually tend to do, also takes courage, because it means you're listening to your inner voice and you're listening to what is really important to you. But again, you guys all want a happy story, so I'm going to give you one. So this July, I entered a pitch competition where I was competing with 20 other people. I was one of only 2 other women, and I won the top prize, which was a £100,000 investment for my business. I should be grateful, but the second prize was a 2-week expenses paid retreat to Bali. How does that make sense, right? So I get money to actually build my business and do more work, and the guy next to me is on a 2-week expenses paid trip. I did try to switch over, but he said no. So my last takeaway is this, really. I'd like to ask all of you to take a good look at the life that you're living. And I'd like to ask you, what nail are you sitting on? Maybe it's a career nail, maybe it's a relationship nail, or maybe it's a nail that you've just put into yourself because you're just not loving yourself enough, or you're not taking care of yourself enough. And then the second thing I'd like you to do is get off that nail. Thank you.
Told you she was a powerhouse, right? How many of you are feeling motivated? How many of you are feeling inspired? Okay, so I'm delivering on some of those promises that I made at the start, right? Brilliant. That was such an amazing speech, and there's so many gems and takeaways. One of my favorite is the greatest act of love you can show is not to be willing to die for anyone, but to live for someone. So all of you who have people that you would die for, ask yourself, what could you do to demonstrate your love by living your full life? And that's an amazing quote. And the takeaways, embracing who you are is the start to your life transforming, embracing your strengths, and Wabi-Sabi?
Wabi-Sabi.
Wabi-Sabi.
Just Google it.
There's beauty in your fractions because they make you who you are. And how many of you are thinking about what actions are you going to take to get off that nail that you're sitting on? Because I know you're all one. So that's not good ratio to being inspired. So how many of you are thinking about the nails you're going to get off?
Yeah, wow.
Oh, yeah, okay, that's more like it. Brilliant. So I know you've probably got loads of questions. I'm going to open the floor to ask Sukhi some questions.
I really love what you said about courage in the face of what appears to be the ideal situation, but obviously kind of when you're being led by money or things like that, it's kind of like in the mind. But like how you obviously, I'd love you just to speak about how you kind of mentally took yourself inside and went, okay, what do I do here? Because obviously you sound like you had some ethical or some kind of other reasons for not wanting to go forward with that. How did you find the strength and what was the kind of turning point that said, you know what, I'm just going to believe in myself?
Okay, so I now believe that pain is actually a really great way to make progress in your life. And actually, biologically, when you have pain in your body, it's your body's way of making you pay attention to that particular area in your life. So the pain I was experiencing was I was really unfulfilled in my life. I felt I was wasting my time. And with all those deaths in my family, it sort of hit home. Like, we all logically and theoretically know that death is going to come to us one day, but it's like a theoretical concept that happens to other people. But when that happened so close to home, and I saw someone passing away, and it just happens like that, and it's just, 1 minute it's there, 1 minute it's not. So I think that's when I said, I don't want to just live so with no purpose. I just don't want to be like a dead fish swimming in the stream. You know that story, a dead fish will get wherever it wants to go, but it's being led by others. So I wanted to be a really active participant in my life. And my dad and I were really close, and he just had so many dreams and so many things he wanted to do after he retired, but he didn't get to retirement age. And so that sort of said to me, I've spent this long in the corporate world. I really hate it. I don't want to be here in another 10 years' time. And you know, I always think, what's the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario in anything is you die, okay? You might lose some money, but you'll get over it. You can always make some more. You know, you might make a fool out of yourself. It's okay. People will laugh and then they'll just move on. People might be disappointed in you, but that's okay. They forget. But I think when you know, you have an obligation, I think, to really sort of live the truest and most fullest life that you can, and only you know that. You know, only you know that. Coming back to that, there's another quote I love. It says, easy decisions lead to a hard life, and hard decisions lead to an easy life. So at that moment in time, the money that was on the table, I'd been, you know, raising for a couple of months. It's hard work going and convincing other people to believe in you. So when he said, okay, we're going to raise his $250,000, I did go home and celebrate. But then the next day, when we started to talk about the terms and these particular two investors, I started to see the way they were behaving with myself and my team, and I knew this is not the way I want to, these are not the types of people I want to bring on board, because I just come out of that really aggressive environment where I was working with people I didn't like. And when you take money from someone, it's like you're entering into a marriage with them. You want to make sure that the relationship's going to be good. And, you know, I guess they made it easy for me because one of the investors, you know, he'd call me up at 6 in the morning or 10 o'clock at night asking for financial data that I'd already sent to him like 5 times before. So I knew he's a bit ditzy, you know, and I thought, do I really want someone like that? And then the second thing, which was the killer thing that made me close the deal, he said, when I politely asked him, can you not contact me at these odd hours, you know, try to contact me during the day, he said, if I give you money, I own you now. So I guess you know why I made that decision. So you have to live true to your values. You know, you can sell out at any point, but I'm here to, you know, it takes courage and fearlessness to say, you know what, stick your money and I can get it elsewhere. And I won the 100 grand. I was a wild card entry into that pitch competition. I just turned up on the day. I was not expecting it. And now I'm raising the remaining cash on this morning. And, you know, actually turning that money down has actually led to incredible opportunities for me. You know, some people have heard my story. And actually just this morning, I was at the London Stock Exchange doing a TV interview with them. So, you know, I think that'll get me some coverage.
Brilliant. Round of applause.
Thank you.
Mo, me,
Others,
everyone.